Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Today we're going to take a look behind the curtain and learn a little bit about the process that historians use when they're preparing material for us, whether it's online, whether it's in books. We're going to talk about a story that is very well known today. As we come up on the 155th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, let's talk about the Iron Brigade fight. Historian Andrew Roscoe has brought a story to our attention, and it's a great chance to talk about the process and the vetting. So thanks for bringing that to us.
Well, thank you. Absolutely, Will.
So the Iron Brigade, the first day, tell us a little bit, give us the capsule history to get us into this.
All right, the Iron Brigade, first of all, is one of the most famous units in the Civil War. It's made of the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin Infantries, the 19th Indiana, and the 24th Michigan. They go into the fighting on the first day, and early on, the 6th Wisconsin's detached. They're taken off to another part of the battlefield. So the other 4 regiments, they go into combat. They are one of the very first infantry regiments in, and they fight that entire first day. They fight 4 separate Confederate brigades. They hold position after position. They're driven back only at great loss themselves and after inflicting terrible losses on the enemy. Finally, at the end of the day, they come back to Cemetery Hill with the rest of the Union forces, and they get put into the famous fishhook line that Meade builds later in the battle. I was writing my master's thesis on the 24th Michigan when I came across something that really stuck with me, and it was 2 letters that were written about a Captain Holland Richardson and how he essentially commanded the Iron Brigade for a great deal of that fight.
Well, let's stop there. Let's meet Holland Richardson for a moment.
Absolutely. Holland Richardson is a captain in the 7th Wisconsin, and he, at the time, was actually serving on the brigade staff as the assistant inspector general. He's not with any of the regiments. He's on the brigade staff at the time, and during the battle, his job would have been to pass orders for his commanding officer and to check on the situation. Well, early in the fighting, Brigadier General Solomon Meredith goes down with a bad wound. Artillery shell explodes, kills his horse, wounds him in the head, and he's out of the fight. He's actually out of the rest of the war because of this wound. And this leads to the point where he can no longer command, and there should be an orderly transition to the next officer in the brigade, and that's Colonel William Robinson, the 7th Wisconsin. However, reading Colonel Robinson's report of the battle, he says it was much later in the fighting that he took command of the brigade. So that leaves me with the question of who commanded the Iron Brigade during the fighting on July 1st.
So you ran into this question. What's one of the first places you would think to check to learn a little bit more about this?
Absolutely. And since the Iron Brigade is so famous, I want to go to the established authors on it. I'm going to go to Alan Nolan with the Iron Brigade and Military History. And I'm going to go to Lance Herdigan's Those Damn Black Hats. These are probably 2 of the most authoritative sources on the Iron Brigade, but neither of these authors really discussed this at any length or really made any comment on it. So that leaves me with a hole in the history and a question. And as a historian, that's my job, is to answer these questions.
So what's the question here?
The question here is, who did command the Iron Brigade from when General Meredith went down until Colonel Robinson assumed command of the brigade? And I had this one nugget of information to go look for. So I had found this article online, and I'm not going to trust some random website that I find online, but the article I read had the ring of authenticity to it. It's not something that I wanted to trust on its own, but it was something it's a string that I could start pulling at to get a bigger story. So it quoted 2 letters in it, and letters are primary sources.
Great. So so you've used a term there. Primary source. Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. A primary source is a piece of history created at the time, whether it's a document, a letter, a memoir, a record, a deed, a census, a photograph, a map. All of these are primary sources. They're produced at the time, and they give as close to the actual events as possible.
Great. So you've used a term. There's got to be another term to go with it. Primary from the time. What's the other?
Absolutely. And the next is a secondary source. So the authors I mentioned earlier, Nolan and Herdigan, are secondary. Their books are secondary sources. They're a compilation of primary and other secondary sources into one place to try to tell a coherent piece of history out of the clues that exist out there. So for me, I'm looking for this primary source, and I don't know where it is. And I wanted to go find the letters, because they're written to governors of Wisconsin. It makes sense I should look in the state archives of Wisconsin where those governors' papers are held. However, when Miss Susan Kruger, the archivist there, went through it, she wasn't able to find either of these letters. But I know these letters existed. So there's other ways I can try to find it.
And how did this journey take you for this one?
So in this case, I ended up getting in contact with a historian named Lee Corbin through the Sons of Union Veterans, who told me where that quote online had come from, and he directed me to something called the Soldiers and Citizens Album of Biographical Record.
Wow, what is that mouthful?
So Victorians did like their long titles, and it's a Grand Army of the Republic, so the Civil War Veterans Organization. It was a publication that they put out in 1890 about Wisconsin soldiers that were still living. In it was an article I found on Captain Richardson. The great thing about being a historian in this day and age is we have the access to the internet. And as I showed you kind of the downside of I found an article online, but I didn't want to trust it. But the internet also opens up plenty of wonderful sources. In this case, a book that I would not be able to find in any library close by me existed on archive.org.
So now you've gone to Captain Richard, or as he retires from the Army, Brevet Brigadier General Richardson's biographical sketch. What do you find?
So in it, I find the article that I had found online with those two quotations of primary sources. Also in it are several other primary sources, letters written between him and Major General Gouverneur K. Warren later in the war. Now, as a historian, I don't want to fully trust this source, the letters in it yet, but there's something I could do. I went to go find those other letters, and they do exist in an archive, and looking at transcripts of them, it shows the same as what this secondary source, this GAR source, is showing me. So it builds my confidence in this source that the other primary documents it quotes I know exist are accurately quoted.
So at the end of the day, if we can trust this source, what have we learned new about Brigade Command and the Iron Brigade during the middle of the fight?
It's so easy to look at history as a sanitized version when we read a book, that it's, someone went down, someone takes command, but it loses that human element of confusion and the absolute chaos of battle. And what we find is Captain Richardson is essentially taking command of the brigade. The men who wrote about him are his division commander, Brigadier General James Wadsworth, and another brigade commander, Brigadier General Lysander Cutler, who had previously served in the Iron Brigade as a colonel. They knew this guy. It's unusual that they would take the time to write to the governor of Wisconsin that this captain had done this, essentially usurped control of the brigade, unless it was for the greater good. It appears to me that he worked in tandem with Colonel Henry Morrow of the 24th Michigan, who was the next most senior colonel. And one of the things is I'm looking at another primary source. In this case, a memoir produced by Major General Abner Doubleday, who was the First Corps commander at the time.
And what does his story tell us?
So his story tells us that he didn't realize Colonel Robinson was the next ranking officer in the brigade, and he sent his orders to Colonel Morrow after General Meredith was wounded because he knew Colonel Morrow and he trusted Colonel Morrow. So there's good reason to believe that if Colonel Morrow was getting orders from that he knew he wasn't the next senior, but he was getting those orders, that between him and Captain Richardson, it looks like they exercised command of the brigade during the fighting, instead of trying to solve this command difficulty under fire while men are dying.
And then as soon as things calm down, the Iron Brigade is back to the base of Culp's Hill, and things have settled for a minute, then what happens?
And then at that point, General Wadsworth tells Colonel Robinson, orders him to assume command, at which point Colonel Robinson assumed command. There's no confusion that he commanded the Iron Brigade for the next several months.
Great. Well, thanks for bringing this to us, Andy, and thanks for sharing both the story and a look at how you took this story, vetted it, and we're excited to see the writing as it comes out.
Well, thank you for having me today. Well, it's been a pleasure.
And thank you for spending your time with us at Civil War Digital Digest. We appreciate your support, whether you're a patron, whether you hit like here and subscribe, whether you're sharing it with your friends. All of that stuff is fantastic, and we really appreciate your support. We'll see you again down the road.